Moving air traffic smoothly across the European network is set to be highly challenging this summer. There are 5.2% more flights expected, and to manage this traffic increase, everyone needs to think network. Thinking network will help mitigate structural capacity shortfalls. Thinking network will help out ANSPs struggling to meet capacity targets. Thinking network is vital when dealing with unexpected traffic surges. Thinking network can help rebalance traffic distribution across the ATM network. Answers and insights from top aviation players at today's EUROCONTROL Strategic Stakeholder Forum.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and indeed good night. Welcome to everyone online registered to this webinar from around the globe, from Norway to Argentina, from the United States the long way round to Japan, approaching 900 registrations before we started 30 seconds ago. My name is Stephen Moore, and I'm head of the ATM network operations at EUROCONTROL Network Manager, and it's great pleasure that I'm here as moderator for this webinar. Today, we're dealing with what's the issue with capacity, looking at the busy summer period ahead for 2025, with traffic expected to grow by 5.2% compared to summer 2024, and indeed looking in detail at how our operational stakeholders are planning to play their part to make the summer run as smoothly as possible, how we all must think network to optimize the operations as much as possible to successfully manage this increase in traffic. To explore the challenges all networked actors will be facing over the summer period, we've lined up 3 colleagues from the aviation network who will share their insights on the challenges that we face, the mitigations already underway in their area, and how we can all work together to make this summer as successful as possible. I'm delighted to introduce you, therefore, to our panelists that you can see on the screen in front of you now. Giovanni Russo, the COO of Geneva Airport, Jesus Munoz, the head of ATFCM and ASMN division in INERE, and finally David Morgan, the COO of EasyJet. These colleagues will be explaining how the actions they're taking to minimize disruptions and contribute to the overall network performance with our Think Network approach is helping them as stakeholders in the network prepare for the summer traffic. But before I turn to our panelists, I'm going to go through some scene-setting slides so that you get the background of why we're here. And then I'll ask the panelists to make their presentations, a verbal update on where they are and what they're looking for and their perspective on this topic for the summer ahead. Thereafter, we'll open up the floor to your questions. We've had quite a few submitted already. You can see on the screen there that if you want to ask questions to our panel, use the Q&A buttons and functionality in the functionality of the tool there, and I will see the questions coming up in front. And if you have any issues, please use the chat function, and the wonderful team here at EUROCONTROL in Brussels supporting this webinar will be able to help and support you in the background. So, without further ado, we'll turn then to the scene setting slides so that we're all on the same page. Summer 2024 network performance wasn't good. In June to August 2024, the traffic increased by 4.7% compared to 23, but the total delay increased by 47% for the same time frame against 2023. Capacity delays were up by 90% compared to the same period in 23, staffing by 20%, and weather delays by almost 50% on 2023 for that period. And you can see there the total share for each of those areas for the summer 24, 40% capacity delay, 13% staffing delay, and 47% of the total delay was weather in summer 24. We're focusing today on the capacity issues. So where did we see some constraints? Well, actually, 7 air navigation providers produced 84% of the capacity delay for that period, 1st of June, end of August last year in the EUROCONTROL network. You can see the details there as it's split across the various ANSPs, but the total capacity delay was nearly 6 million minutes for that time frame. However, some of the ACCs experienced traffic loadings higher than that which was forecast in the high forecast before the summer started. So perhaps there's something here in accurate forecasting, or indeed accurate scheduling, sharing of the plans. For example, you can see on the right-hand side instances of 20% increases of traffic opposed to forecasts of 10%. It's not necessarily the best when you're trying to plan to deal with the capacity constraints that we already have. So we are, and we were last year, in a highly saturated network where any issue as a local issue really is not a local problem. It becomes a network problem. As you see there, there's no such thing as a network problem. And as I said at the start, summer 2025 has the traffic increase expected of 5.2% over 2024. A significant challenge that's there in a constrained network already. Just for a little bit more detail, if we can continue to the next slide, we can see where the traffic growth is coming this year versus last year. Of course, there's no test on the end of this, but if you were to imagine that all of the darker colours on that map of the Eurocontrol area are traffic increases above 4, 5, 6% this year, and the lighter green is where the traffic is increasing between 2 and 5%, you can see very clearly two whole areas down the southwest and southeast axis where traffic really is increasing significantly this year. If we look at the delay forecast this year 2025 compared to 24, this time last year, the planning indicated that for all flights in the year, the average delay would be 2 minutes per flight. At the same time this year, for the work we did last year, we're looking at 2.5 minutes per flight. However, a lot of the work that happens at Eurocontrol, at the network manager with the stakeholders, is to alleviate and reduce that. And you can see on the left of the screen there that we reduced that to 1.69 minutes per flight just at about the start of April last year with the planning process. We're just a little bit ahead with this webinar. We don't have that final figure for 2025, but I think it's fair to say you can expect a commensurate reduction on the 2.54 minutes there. But it clearly is plain to see that we are not having a summer without delay. And then if we look at the next picture, it indicates where some of that delay may be before we have what we call these network measures to move traffic flows structurally to try and increase the available use of the capacity that we have. Again, assuming that the darker colours are the areas of, in this case, increased delay, you can see the southeast and down towards the southwest axis there, through Germany, down through Hungary into Greece, and down the southwest side through into Spain particularly. We are seeing some increases there in delay. So with the scene set, the simple question, where the answer is perhaps far more challenging, is what must change? What do we need to do differently? So I've spoken far too much as a moderator, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce all of the panelists that you hopefully can see now. But I'm going to ask first Giovanni from Geneva Airport to put the perspective from the airports in the aviation infrastructure, and particularly from Geneva as he wishes. Good afternoon to you, Giovanni. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Stephen. Thank you very much. And hello to everybody online as well. So it's a great pleasure being here with you today. And I think, be it at a global level, be it at local level for airports, there are three main pillars in order to face capacity challenges. And it may sound rather basic, but it's increased predictability, then take responsibilities and cooperate. So I'll probably elaborate a bit on that. So increasing predictability is really to already in the planning phase to make sure that you plan according to what is possible. You make sure that you staff correctly ahead of time, ahead of operation, your resources, and you continue to monitor that throughout the planning phase until to the day of operation. I think that's a real essential thing, and we should actually really today often we're rather doing sort of capacity management, but we really need to do capacity planning. So to be one step ahead just will help us through difficult times. So we know the summer is going to be difficult, but so we must plan for it. So that's really the first pillar. The second pillar, then take responsibilities, is really to make sure that what you committed into your plans, that you would deliver this as well. So that's not just airports; it's all the players in the game. Stick to the plan. I think that's one of the most important things. Obviously, there are always surprises. A plan remains a plan, but I mean, if you let's say as an airport, you promise to handle, I don't know, 20 departures an hour, but you only have staff of 15. This doesn't work. So you don't need to stick to that. The same. I mean, if you have a realistic planning, let's say on the airline side, and unfortunately don't have enough aircraft to operate, that's rather pity. And then cooperate, the third point, that's again a very essential matter. You need to cooperate throughout the entire phase, from planning into the operations. You need to be transparent with your partners. Locally at the airport, we do that through collaborative decision making. Quite a few airports today have Airport Operations Center and apply CDM principles. In Geneva, we do have both, and we also share ahead of time rather confidential figures together with our handling agents and our main airline customers, in order to make sure that we can prepare the entire system for the day of operation. And I think that's a real essential, and I think there has been some progress made. Nevertheless, that's still something we can increase. Then obviously, again, from the airport side, we know there will be disruptions, there will be delays. Nevertheless, we must as well respect and take our responsibilities against, or towards rather, towards the neighbors of our airports. We must, unfortunately, or let's say it's not unfortunately, because we have to stick to night curfews, and this needs to be taken into account, because obviously in the short term we would rather prefer not to, but on the long run, if we want to run our business in the future, we cannot ignore population around airports. And let's say the challenge, the big challenge we have now with the latest events on the international political scene is to remain flexible, to be open for routes opening up again. This may look like an opportunity, but this will, if this would become possible, this would change actually plans, and this would be again a huge challenge. So what we really specifically did at Geneva Airport was to make sure that all our partners on the platform are aware of peaks that will occur this summer. Now, Geneva is a bit special because we are now in the middle of our busiest period. So we get already the fire exercise for summer. That's a good part of it. And the only thing that really works is to have regular follow-up meetings at even at sea level, and then align again everybody on the platform to put the efforts where it's most needed. And I think this can be scaled up, but we are also doing at European level and network level. And again, I think it's important to be tough in negotiating, but not blaming too much, because in principle, I think every actor is willing to do its best. I'm not saying we should not be addressing issues, but we need to again be responsible and respect the human beings behind the scenes. So yeah, in a nutshell, it's a really the rather cheap principle. Plan, stick to the plan, and cooperate.
Thank you, Giovanni. As you can see, I'm busy making notes and I have 1,000 questions already, but I won't launch in because it'd be great to hear from the other panelists first. But really appreciate that introduction from Geneva Airport. So without further ado, then, I'd like to ask Jesus from INERE to just put the consideration from the ANSP, the air traffic perspective, into this. What's the issue with capacity? Good afternoon to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, Steven, and good afternoon, everybody. First of all, apologize in name of Xavi Benavent, who finally has not been able to connect to the meeting, although his flight, I have to say, that arrived on time. So with no further delay, from the ANSP perspective, I have to say that maybe we are suffering the perfect storm, and we are suffering a situation after the COVID recovery with a very volatile and unpredictable traffic profile. As you all may know, probably we have had a traffic growth that has been really unexpected in many parts of the network above the high Stratford forecast. And furthermore, this growth has not been uniform along the net. So the traffic demand profiles have shifted with a higher number of demand peaks and of greater intensity. In addition, we have to take into account that we are suffering geopolitical conflicts with growing military activity in all the European countries, with airspace restrictions and in some cases related shifts in early demands that have altered the expected flows that have exacerbated the issue with the capacity. Furthermore, we are suffering an increase in extreme weather phenomena, especially in some areas in Europe, for instance, in the Mediterranean area. And taking all these factors into consideration, we are suffering as air navigation service providers unpredictability of the traffic demand. We have to take into account, for instance, the last-minute flight planning choices that sometimes or frequently airlines do. Also, the influence that, for instance, winds a lot have on the flight plan route, reducing the reliability of historical flight plans route data that we use to forecast traffic by aerospace sectors. And sometimes this leads to that the practical decisions we have to make as a navigation service provider are based on not accurate or not reliable information. In addition, more factors that have contributed to this situation, to that issue, is that legacy designs of airspace are not always aligned with these actual, sometimes new traffic flows. And these all factors together have placed additional stress on capacity, affecting both airspace capacity and ATCO needs, given that the requirements for ATCOs is directly conditioned by the demand peaks. So as we have a multi-phase problem, the solution does not lie on a single actor or on a single factor. So from an ANSP perspective, we must adopt a multi-layered approach, I would say, that involves mainly, I would say, factor number one, I would highlight more workforce and more efficiently used. I would also say we need to modernize airspace to leverage automation, more regulatory and laboral agreement flexibility, because in some cases, for instance, in Spain, we have to deal with some national regulations that really have a great impact in the last minute availability and on the flexibility of ATCOs. And finally, I would highlight another important factor to foster collaboration among all the actors involved in the network. So, given the situation and all these problems I have mentioned, I would highlight the main strategies we are working on and we have to develop from a strategical point of view, but also on a practical and tactical point of view. First of all, the main strategy I would highlight is to get more ATCOs workforce and more training improvements. For instance, in an area, 2 out of each 3 minutes of delay due to ATC capacity have been in collapse sectors. So it's very clear that we need more ATCOs just for next summer. In this sense, many, I would say, all air navigation service providers are making a great effort to implement accelerated training programs. So I would say this is the first and probably the main strategy we are developing and we have to develop. Of course, we have to work also on establishing more flexible rostering policies and more flexible rostering models to align workforce availability with demand. We have to keep working on airspace modernization with implementation, for instance, of modular airspace management elements to allow sector configuration flexibility. We also have to work and are working in dynamic resectorization in order to enable the adjustment of airspace configurations in real time based on actual traffic demand. Developing, for instance, in new connectivities and new direct routes in order to accommodate the needs of aircraft operators. We need to keep working, and I would say acceleratedly, in the development of route or free route aerospace. We also have to develop new capacity strategies in order to expand and enhance the current capacity values, for instance, by applying in a more intensive way occupancy strategies instead of simply hourly entry counts. We also need to work in the full and flexible use of airspace optimization process in order to free up restricted areas to the maximum extent possible. In this sense, for instance, we are working with our military side, actively increasing the plan availability times of these areas, trying to free up recent levels for overflights and also modifying the geometry of restricted areas. And we are also working to divide them into different blocks in order to use only the minimum number of blocks needed for the military activity, and in order to free up the rest for them to be available for flight planning. We also have to work in order to enhance our air traffic flow management measures at network level. I think the network level is the correct approach in order to deal with this situation. But even at internal level, we have to try to apply more bold strategies, for instance, by applying in saturated sectors regulation of specific flows in order to try to minimize the global delay generated. Also, we have to keep working, as we did in last summer, in the exclusion of critical flights according to the need of aircraft operators. Finally, I would highlight two more factors. The need to continue developing technology and automation innovation. The spread, for instance, of CPDLC would work in favor of the increase of capacity in saturated sectors. And of course, we have to implement new decision support tools for ATCOs in order to from one side to increase the predictability of the traffic and also to allow dynamic sectorization and to assist them in order to manage workload more effectively, enabling to increase the available capacity, especially in more saturated sectors. And finally, the collaboration and the data sharing between all the stakeholders, among all the stakeholders involved, air navigation service providers, airlines, airports, but also, for instance, the military side, the National Safety Agency, and the regulatory part of each country that sometimes have a very great impact in the availability of ATCOs, for instance. So the solution must involve not all the three actors we are here speaking together, but many more in each country.
Thank you, Jesus, very much indeed, and also for stepping in support of the webinar. We really appreciate it. Again, like with Giovanni, I'm not going to dive in with all the questions I have from that introduction. Thank you. And last but by no means least, I'm going to turn now to David Morgan, COO from EasyJet, who has been working this morning before joining the webinar and has not just got dressed up for the webinar. So, David, thank you so much for joining after your busy morning. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon, Stephen. Glad they're ready. Yeah, as Stephen says, I don't normally just turn up in the office wearing a captain's uniform. I have actually been out making the most of the nice weather, doing a UK domestic. And so if anyone from NATS is watching, thank you. No capacity delays from NATS this morning. I thought I'd just talk really in two parts. Firstly, the impact of capacity delays for us, and then go on to talk about what EasyJet is doing in order to do our part as part of the network in supporting summer 25 operations. I mean, the impact, I'm sure many of you realize, is absolutely horrendous on airlines. When I look at the actual, some figures year to date, we're in a quiet period of the year. Of all our delays, 29% are capacity, 13% are staffing. The rest is weather and other bits and pieces, which in itself is not an unusual kind of breakdown. But the worrying thing is that's 41% year-on-year increase in capacity delays. That's just, in this first couple of months, and staffing up at 178% year-on-year. So, we're not even anywhere near the summer, and there's some worrying signs that things are moving in the wrong direction. And we shouldn't forget, of course, that 2024 wasn't a stellar year. It's not like we're having a big difference between what was a great year. The gap between 23 and 24 was also huge. So that's worrying. And I also are worried because whilst I hear that a number of the ACCs will have more sectors open in summer 25, there's also a good number that will actually have less than 2024. And some that will have about the same. So, over time, I guess we'll have to understand why that's happening and what are the mitigations against that. The Southeast axis across Europe remains probably, one of my biggest concerns, and areas, controlled by DFS especially, are really needing to deliver in order to be able to support those flows of traffic. And, I think things like staffing, which sort of seem to come around every year. I've been flying a very long time, and there's hardly a year I can remember where we haven't had staffing issues. And I really think as a collective aviation industry, we need to address staffing in a different way, in a much more strategic and aggressive way, in order to be able to meet those challenges. And I know there's lots of challenges with labour laws and with retirements and turnover and everything else, lots of things against us. But if we're going to make any progress, in years to come, we've got to stop talking about staffing delays every year. The cost of the capacity delay disruption in monetary terms is eye-watering. It's hundreds of millions of euros. It's borne almost entirely by the airlines, and that comes in individual costs to compensation to passengers for welfare costs for overnights and hotels and transport. Additional resilience needed to absorb those sort of delays. So more crew, more standby aircraft, and even routing across certain areas of airspace now has become more costly, because you're either restricted from taking the cheaper option, or you're going to get delays if you don't go across more expensive airspace. So a lot of things against us from a cost perspective. It made doubly hard by curfewed airports. Many airlines such as ourselves operate a lot of curfewed airports. The curfews are becoming stricter and stricter. The cost of breaching curfews are becoming more and more expensive, eye-watering, and so everything is putting on pressure on being able to achieve a reasonable line of flying for an aircraft during a day without losing the flights at the end of the day due to curfew busts and so on. So more importantly, what are we doing? What is EasyJet doing to try and do their part? One of the things, and I know that NM has been focusing on it as well, is in the pre-tactical phase. So, overnight before the day starts, looking at which bits of airspace are going to be most problematic, and can we be flight planning around those more congested areas. So there's going to be a big focus on pre-tactical this year. In terms of the schedules, I know NM likes to use the phrase realistic schedules. I think no airline will put out an unrealistic schedule, but nevertheless, we've had to, like many, trim certain parts of the schedule. That's not always easy. It's not always simple as shifting flights around, especially when you have an airport slot that you have to adhere to. And if you're constantly off slot, you will lose that slot. So airlines are in a difficult position in terms of adjusting schedules. Nevertheless, we, as many others, have had to take a bit of an axe to some parts of it where we've seen problems from last year. Adding more crew, of course, in order to split up flight duty periods. So whereas crew might be able to quite comfortably do a 4-sector duty within a flight duty period in a winter period or a shoulder period, once the delays kick in the peak summer, that flight duty period becomes too long because of the delays, and therefore we've had to choose to split up many of those. We've obviously got to invest in more crew to be able to do that, but that's been a necessary evil in order to be able to tackle that. Then focus on first rotation. We talk about it. We've talked about it the last couple of years. Super important. We certainly encourage everybody involved in the sector to focus on first wave. Getting a first wave away means you have some chance of completing the day in a reasonable way. If it's a disastrous first rotation, then it's very, very difficult to pick things up again later on. I think that like many airlines, we've invested more in ground handling resource to be able to support first wave, and where ACDM is operated at an airport, really enforcing the sort of strict adherence to ACDM principles. Discipline flight plan execution. I think it's a separate webinar, so we won't go too much into that, but clearly fly as you file is a focus for us. I think, it's probably, it's not something that we should get overly excited as an enabler. The flight plan execution has been largely the same for many years, even since pre-COVID, and yet the delays are getting worse. So it's not that the execution is getting worse. Execution is about the same. We can still lift it up a bit, and that is going to be important, but it's not like it's deteriorating. So I think that's something we need to dig into more. CPDLC, so data link, definitely, encouraging every user to be using data link. We know that that's beneficial for everybody, and I think we need to think, how do we squeeze that last sort of 10-20% of users onto it to be able to support that. Finally, our ask really as an airline to our colleagues and ASPs and airports, do everything possible to recruit and train the correct levels of controllers, and deliver that declared capacity. I think that is above all the most important thing, delivering the declared capacity, because it's when capacity is declared but not delivered, that's when things start going wrong. Work with the NM on being as pre-tactical as possible, less reactive on the day, so that we can get ahead of the trouble, and hopefully come up with some mitigations. For the airports, resource the tower, especially if you're listening, Gatwick, please. And in terms of, if you're an ACDM airport, just ensure it's operating to the highest standards of ACDM compliance. We have a range of abilities, if you like, in that area across Europe. Some fantastic, some terrible, frankly, and we really need to kind of lift our game on ACDM. So that's probably it in a nutshell from me. Stephen, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, David. And again, lots of really good feedback and quality information there. It's really, when I hear the three of you speak about the reality of the situation from David, the preparation and planning from Giovanni, and then from Jesus, the things that need to be done, I'm left scratching my head a little bit. What's the summer going to be like in 2025? Because it's difficult to really pin that down. And then I think there's some more questions that lead from that, along the lines of, well, are we planning to fail already, or are we making marginal gains and improvements to make the summer as best as it can be? Giovanni, if I can come back to you right at the very start, for example, with your 3 pillars, which really were very clearly explained. You talked about having that, the predictability by planning and working hard, knowing that there will be disruptions and delays. A slightly unfair question, in as much as I don't expect you to have at your fingertips the answer necessarily, but how many days go to plan?
Well, I think you have teams that plan continuously, and these are dedicated teams. I think that's the investment you need to do. I'm not sure I fully understood the question, but
well, for example, so working on the predictability, you talked about the responsibilities, and cooperate with the stakeholders in there, but we've got a great plan for tomorrow. Throughout the summer, we see so much disruption. You said earlier that right now you're in your busiest period in Geneva because, of course, of the skiing traffic. If you had the same amount of traffic in the summer, the days would be far less likely to go to plan, one assumes, with many more CTOTs for your departures because of the influence of the network. So how many days actually go for plan?
Oh, sorry. I mean, even in our business period today, actually, it almost never goes to plan. So no, to be very honest. So
Yeah.
so you do your plan, then you learn from the days that have passed, have been produced or have been operated, and then you adjust resources accordingly, and you adjust your plan. I mean, that's the thing. So I think a day completed to plan, that's a very scarce event. I mean, you always
Thank you.
have something that goes wrong. So, but this doesn't
Thank you.
prevent you from planning. And I
Understood,
think
understood.
the big advantage of planning is that you put in resources where they're most likely to be useful.
Okay, that's understood. David, from your perspective, how many days go to the plan of operating the schedule as opposed to safety things? How many days go according to the schedule?
As we get into the peak summer,
Yeah.
less and less. We have some airports where 75% of our first rotation has a CTOT. So that is really difficult then to keep things on track. So you're constantly catching up, firefighting, swapping stuff around, recrewing, and so on. So when you get in the thick of it, you're managing on the hoof. That's why pre-tactical, and especially on days where there's weather associated with capacity and staffing. So that's where your pre-tactical really comes into its own, and something that I think we need to focus more on as a network.
Thank you. You mentioned weather, and you mentioned earlier as well that the discipline flight plan execution as a bit of a trailer. Those are the subjects of the following two webinars to come. So we'll steer a little bit away from those, as you indicated as well, to make sure that we don't go into that territory. This is really about what's the issue with capacity and what can we do differently. So, Jesus, if I can turn to you then. Everything that we heard, or a lot of what we heard at the start from you, was about the things that need to change. More ATCOs, more modernisation, changes, more flexible use of airspace, flexible rostering. How much of that have you been able, or ANSPs more generally, been able to do ready for this summer?
Many ANSPs, I'm sure, and in the first place is the ANSP, of course, I know more, are making a huge effort in across many areas, and significant work is being done actually in increase operational efficiency, in implementing accelerated training programs and flexible rostering models. Nevertheless, the problem we have to react very quickly is that from an ANSP perspective, the availability of ATCOs is complex. Is the recruitment and qualification of new controllers take between 2 or 3 years on average, more or less. And even if ANSPs have been hiring new people, new controllers cannot be deployed immediately. That's the point. For instance, just some figures for you to understand this situation. The ATCOS workforce is dimensioned based on long-term forecast, not on short-term traffic fluctuation. And for instance, workforce for summer 24 was planned in 2021 based on available forecast. And in the case of Spain, according to this forecast, in Spain in 2023, traffic was expected to be minus 15% compared to 2019, and it finally was plus 2% over 2019. So it means plus 17% over the traffic forecast used to size the ATCOS workforce. That is something that we and IRE, as air navigation service provider, have to deal with, and I suppose it's more or less the same for the ANSPs. Although in Spain we are well above the average recovery of the traffic, and being this way, we are taking into account the en route delay more or less 50% below the average in Europe. But another factor, but another important factor, is what I have mentioned before: is some national labors and soft collective agreements that, despite these difficulties we are having to meet the capacity needs based on the ATCOS availability, we are suffering many unexpected absenteeism, many last-minute absence of ATCOS. Yes, another example: when I had my daughter many years ago, I enjoyed 2 free days. Nowadays in Spain, ENAIRE is hiring new ATCOs. New ATCOs are young, of course, and each time one of them have a child, he or she can enjoy 4 months instead of 2 days, as it was 20 years ago. They can enjoy 4 months of leave. And They also, not only ATCOs, all the workers here in Spain have the possibility to have some last minute communication of 3 days because of health issues or something like that. And that is something that we as air navigation service provider has to deal with. So we are making an effort. We are incorporating new ATCOs a lot, not only for this summit this year, but also we have planned an incorporating program for the coming 5-6 years. And we are increasing a lot the net numbers of ATCOs in our ACC in order to be able to open all the sectors we have now and all the new sectors we are going to have along this year and along the coming years, considering the new airspace program we are developing in order to split more saturated sectors and in order to modernize the airspace infrastructure.
Thank you. That's understood. So there's constraints there for an ANSP in terms of the forecasting and getting that forecasting right, and that comes back to the first points that Giovanni made right at the very start of the webinar. There are also then issues with, if I can call it labour law, just in terms of the rights of employers. That's not a judgmental statement. It's just what the situation is in, and that differs, of course, in the network. So you've described what appears to me to be exceptionally generous paternity-maternity type arrangements in Spain. Other countries would have different arrangements, so that's another difficulty. David, with all this going on, what do you, I mean, is that okay? I mean, with what must change with all this going on, what can we do differently from your perspective, or do you just have to put up and expect delays?
So, you know, I think that in terms of, is there an acceptable level of delay? Of course, we live in a real world. We know that, you know, busy summers, that delays are kind of part and parcel of that. But I think what's disappointing is that staffing delays really should be more exceptional rather than, oh, here we go, another bunch of staffing delays. We don't seem to, as an aviation industry, right across the board, being able to tackle that. I think that particularly in terms of peak summer periods, every year we're struggling with staffing, and that shouldn't really happen. You know, in terms of capacity, we're growing, as I think you mentioned earlier, 5.2% of traffic in summer 25. You know, it's not an astronomical growth. Yeah, it is more traffic, but we shouldn't see a disproportionate increase in capacity delays. We should be able to manage that capacity, and ideally with technology, which is, you know, we're seeing constantly system upgrades in various countries happening, but it doesn't seem to be doing anything to the amount of capacity delays that we're seeing. We're still seeing growth in capacity minutes every year. So, you know, what's going wrong there? We should see that starting to come down.
So that point of 5.2%, that's for the whole year. So that's why in the summer period, we do see something a little more significant than that in some areas. But it's a very good point. If I can sort of pick up from that, we've known that the number of ATCOs needed needs to be increased for some time. It's not news, and this isn't specifically for in an area situation. It's just in general in the network. A lot of controllers were recruited in the 1990s. Hey, guess what? 35 years later, they're coming to the end of their working careers and looking forward to their well-deserved pensions, but we seem to have a shortage of ATCOs. We don't seem to have planned for this. Is that the feeling that you get as well, David, that it's not been planned for, or it's just been maybe affected heavily by COVID? Perhaps that's the issue here.
I think, you know, to be brutally honest, I think there's some poor planning in there. I think there's some poor strategic planning, and I think that not aggressive enough planning. I think, you know, you can't be too much of an optimist when it comes to planning, especially staffing. You have to assume the worst. You have to assume that people are going to be difficult to get. You've got to increase the pipeline, increase the training pipeline, and really pull every lever. It is that important. It is costing the industry, you know, hundreds and hundreds of millions every year, and ultimately that ends up, you know, on ticket prices and everything else. So I do think planning is a big part of it, Stephen.
I must remind everyone, please do submit your questions. There's an excellently timed question just dropped in, which means at least one person is listening, which is heartening to us all. I'll read it out as it is. Wouldn't it be beneficial to decide whether airspace users want cost cutting or capacity, as it seems the ANSPs are unable to do both? So which is it, David? Do you want lower route charges, or do you want lower delays?
Well, on route charges, I always chuckle when people say, why don't we just pay more in route charges? I was just looking at your Eurocontrol report for January, where airlines were billed 800 million for charges. That's 20% more than January 24. Now, some of that is for more flights, but 11% is for higher charges year on year. EasyJet alone spends hundreds of millions in en route charges. Spend more on en route charges than do on maintaining our fleet of aircraft. So I think that what is happening to those charges, it's not all about going directly into staffing. Something else is money is being wasted there. I think the airlines pay enough in en route charges, more than enough in en route charges. I don't think it's a case of we're holding back on that, and that is causing the capacity issue.
Thank you. Again, I'll come to you, Jesus, and Giovanni. I haven't forgotten you. I've got some corker questions here for you as well. But Jesus, just at that point, and this isn't a question for an area, it's just a general question. Do you find it's cost cutting or greater capacity?
I think it's greater capacity. Nevertheless, it's worth mentioning that as air navigation service providers, it's probably, as David has said, that there was a fail in the long-term planning, in the strategical planning of the ATCOS workload. It's from my point of view, it is clear, but there is a main reason. The main reason is that the post-COVID recovery has really surprised everyone, and we were really working on data to size the workforce that finally has been highly surpassed. So that is the main explanation. Of course, but there is also another factor, that the capability of a navigation service provider in order to train ATCOS is limited. So even if we hire a very high number of ATCOS every year, we don't have the possibility to train them properly. So this is another limited factor. So the point here is that although we are just implementing an air navigation service provider accelerated hiring and training programs, the training takes its time. So it's not possible to train all the people all the time at the same time. So it will take months, I would say even years. Nevertheless, I hope with the effort we are making at the whole level, not only in air, this summer will be better than last summer, and the results will go improving year after year.
Okay, thank you. Giovanni, turning to you, there are a couple of actual questions that have come in about some specifics in Geneva Airport, which I'll come to if there's time, but just an open question. Have you any thoughts or feedback on what you've heard in the last sort of 15-20 minutes from David and Jesus in terms of the capacity versus cost versus planning versus the pre-tactical work? Anything that you'd want to add in or throw into the mix?
Well, I think one of the difficulties for ANSPs is that they don't really have an entrepreneurship freedom. You have a very highly regulated system with what you may transfer to charges or not, and I strongly believe that this is limiting for an ANSP to provide for the adequate capacity in the future. I mean, at airports we are free to do some investments ahead of time in order to be ready for the future. So we are much less regulated, and it's let's say direct. It depends a bit on the system, but generally it's a direct negotiation with the main concerned airlines. And at least in Geneva, throughout the last three charging periods, we were able to reach a deal, and I think that's a huge advantage. So now to hear that retirements can't be planned for or haven't been planned for, I remember when I was a young air traffic controller in the early 90s, this was already the case. So I think the system should learn to anticipate the retirements. But yeah, I think, as I said, maybe sometimes to have too much regulation on the cost recovery scheme is not really helping the system in itself.
Thank you for that. Interestingly, a couple of questions are popping in now that are on, as we'd hope, on the same sort of subject areas. One has come in from an anonymous attendee. The structural issues in the network are due to decades of poor management, due to monopoly services provided by government entities, in effect. Could privatising them, by which I mean the providers that are currently public, of course, could privatising them really deliver better outcomes? David, you fly across all of Europe as EasyJet and as a pilot yourself. Do you notice a difference between privatized and public providers of services to your airline?
It's a really interesting question, and you know, I wouldn't want to call out poor service from those that are not privatized, but you do see it in the kind of quality of the reporting data that you get from those that are running it as a business rather than being funded by the state to do it. So I think it's a fair challenge. I'm certainly not against privatization of functions like ANSPs because it can drive more innovation, efficiency, etc. So but you know, whether I would notice on a flight from A to B that, oh yeah, here we go, we're going into a state-funded ACC here. No, not the case. But I think you do notice it when I'm sifting through reports and looking at the efficiency of that particular ANSP.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting. So, Giovanni, if I can come back to you, there was a question I wanted to ask around the capacity that's sold at an airport. So, and I really don't mean to patronize anyone who's listening along, but we have what we call airport slots, that's sold to operate into the airport or from the airport. And then we have air traffic slots. Are we selling too many of these runway slots, regardless of the situation that exists in the network with the capacity constraints?
Well, just first of all, I'd like to emphasize we're not selling slots; they are attributed, at least in most airports. Okay. There is some slot trading, but at least in Geneva, they're attributed by an independent entity. So it really considers the current situation at the airport. It considers a runway capacity for Geneva specifically and terminal capacity. So basically, if you've got a slot in Geneva, you can smoothly operate in and out of Geneva. Now, the slot itself is not linked to a particular route, so therefore it would be very hard actually to connect it with the network. And furthermore, an airport slot is given to allow an airline to publish a schedule. A regular schedule, so that people can book their flight and know that they take the, let's say, 12:50 flight from Geneva to Heathrow or from Geneva to Gatwick. If you would start linking these two, the airport slots and the ATFM slots, all of a sudden you would actually have changing, let's say, flight time changing throughout time or throughout days, and this would be quite tricky. Another option could be that if you are granted an airport slot, you're also granted a CFMU slot. But again, I think the impact on again, take Geneva Gatwick. At Geneva Gatwick, you may have weather, you may have industrial actions, you may have overload in sectors. So you wouldn't be able to communicate early enough to passengers what time their flight is expected to leave. So unfortunately, this balance is working. Then there are a few airports that unfortunately suffer quite a lot from weather impacts, be it strong winds, be it winds in a certain directions, be it low visibility. And obviously, usually airports would plan for the nice weather scenario. And there one could say that sometimes too many slots are open up if you would consider the worst situation.
Okay, thank you. There's just a couple of more questions on there before I ask each of you to give a final sort of statements and things that you want to make before we close. Because believe it or not, we've almost been going for an hour. So it's one specific for Geneva, but someone's taken the time to write it, and so I'll just ask it. I think it can be a fairly straightforward response. Are there exceptions made, Giovanni, for delayed flights to land after a curfew time in Geneva? Or put it another way, how strict is the airport to airlines that are running late?
Well, the situation is it's not really only in the airport's hand, it's in the Swiss law. So the airport curfew starts at midnight, and the late flights may be allowed to operate until midnight 30. And after midnight 30, the only option would be for exceptional and unforeseeable events. Unfortunately or fortunately, we don't have much of them. So snow in winter is not exceptional. Thunderstorm most generally are not unforeseeable. So we're talking about, I don't know, a volcano outbreak, about a war situation, whatever. So yes, you have to be rather strict with this half an hour of let's say, reserve time for incoming flights.
Okay, thank you for that. There's loads more questions coming in. It's like everyone's waited till the end, and we have no chance now to get through most of those, but I will try and come back to a couple more before we close. So I'm going to turn now in the reverse order, starting with David and then going through Jesus and to Giovanni, to ask for just your closing thoughts and conclusions. Remember, we're talking about what's the issue with capacity and what do we have to do for this summer. David.
So if there was one message I would leave, it is about delivering the declared capacity. I think there's nothing that stuffs us up more, frankly, than where the capacity is not delivered on plan, because then the pack of cards starts coming down. So do everything possible to deliver that declared capacity. And probably the second one would be just on this pre-tactical flight planning. It's something that we have talked about last year a little bit, but it never really happened. So this year, and I know there's a separate forum on it, but I think that is the one opportunity we have of perhaps making some of the bad days considerably better.
Thank you. Jesus.
Yeah, from a navigation service perspective, we are really working for this summer in training more ATCOs, in having the possibility to squeeze the most the availability of these ATCOs in order to relax maybe some constraints we have on navigation service providers regarding the maintenance of the operational competency. So we are trying to analyze different options in order to try to get the most operational hours of our ATCOs. And another point I would like to highlight, in addition to what we have mentioned before, for instance, we are working closely with the military side in order to try to have the maximum possible availability of the aerospace, of the military areas, etc. And it's also very important the step forward we, as a community, have the step forward we have taken this year in order to make decisions not only for severe weather situations, but also for capacity demand imbalancing situations, to make decisions from a network level. And it will also very important for the coming years to try to align this approach at a network level with the delay targets that at ANSP we have at individual level. So for the coming summer, this network approach is the way forward, and it supports this way of working. But for the coming years, I would also highlight the need to align these procedures, this way of working with the global objectives of each ANSP.
Thank you. And then last but not least, Giovanni.
Well, if you want to get through the summer, I really think you need to do actions that are really effective this summer. So following again the network manager initiative, Think Network, I think is strategically important. It's also about showing presence at managerial level in the operations, airports, airlines, ANSPs. To have a physical presence will always remind people that we are taking it seriously. We're not just talking about it, but we really expect people to do it. And well, last but not least, to ensure proper communication with the network manager, but also with the partners. So it's about if you have capacity constraints, just make sure that everyone knows in time. And maybe also that's it for airports, airlines, lesser degree for ANSPs. release unused capacity early enough. I think that's still a problem today, that even if you see you can't make your CTOT, you're still trying to do it. If you see there is no way to do it, just release it. If someone else can take the slot, this will help the system.
Thank you. Listen, we're very close to the end here. There's one question that I want to cover, and I'll do it because it specifically asked the question of Eurocontrol, and then I'll summarize. What's the recommendation Eurocontrol has for ATCOs? Do we have to stick to the flight plan, or we have to prioritize the first rotation in a busy day? I think I would not be speaking incorrect if I say both, please. They're not mutually exclusive. They're really not. The prioritization of the first rotation doesn't refer to cutting corners. It refers to getting it off the gate, getting it airborne on time. The rest of the day will work a lot better as a result. And then sticking to the flight plan releases, believe it or not, close to about 10% capacity in the network as opposed to what can happen. But that's a taster for another webinar to come. So I really hope you've enjoyed this webinar. I must thank the panelists tremendously, David, Jesus and Giovanni. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your inputs and your preparation. I really appreciate it, especially on a Friday afternoon. I'd also like you as the audience to thank you for turning up, listening to us, putting your questions into the chat there. I'm sorry we couldn't cover them all. Please, though, stay tuned for our next webinars coming up. There should be a slide there, the next one, 21st of March, on a different subject entirely, towards a new model for ATM service delivery with new service-oriented architecture. But from this webinar, what's wrong with capacity and what's the issue? Well, there are three pillars that we need to progress: predictability, take responsibility, and deliver what we've promised. A third of the ACCs for this summer are offering capacity lower than in 2024. We need more ATCOs, more modernization, more flexible use of rostering, more collaboration, being mindful of the military activities and the geopolitical situation. We need to deliver the declared capacity, so David and all of the colleagues that are flying on the plans can deliver on those plans. And we need more effort into the pre-tactical planning and pre-tactical work, thinking network for this summer. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen, for being on the panel. Good afternoon and nice weekend to everyone.
Right.